Many children's shows aim to teach their audience valuable lessons on themes such as friendships, leading healthy lives, and thinking through our actions. All this comes wrapped up in a 20-minute story, so we didn't catch on when we were young. However, sometimes older viewers notice things producers have never intended to be seen. These theories cast a darker tint over some of our favorite children's shows, which then tell very different stories upon rewatching. Number 5. ScoobyDoo has been a staple on children's TV since the 1960s. Though it's gone through many iterations over the years, the general premise has always been the same. A group of 4 friends and their dog travel to new locations, which are always being terrorized by some kind of monster. The monster more often than not is trying to scare people away from a particular place. The gang work out who would want to do such a thing, capture the monster, and unmask it to reveal one of the locals they met. Given the time it's been on air for, it's little wonder why countless theories about Mystery Incorporated have sprung up over the years, but one theory has much more weight than the others. The theory says that the original show took place during an economic depression. The overall visuals of the show are usually dark and gritty, as the gang travel to run-down locations in towns that never seem to be thriving. Some Redditors have pointed out that the only vehicles shown in the show, other than the iconic Mystery Machine, belong to rich people. The villains themselves are often people who should have had respectable jobs, such as scientists, museum curators, and attorneys. According to the theory, the economic situation has cost them their jobs, and they're forced into their crimes to try to make ends meet. More often than not, the villains are protecting or trying to obtain properties or valuables rather than the actual money. This is another indicator that money itself isn't worth all that much, likely due to inflation. We also never see money change hands. Despite the name Mystery Incorporated indicating the gang is running some sort of business, and them completing a job as almost every episode, they're never paid for their services in catching the villain. They also rarely ever pay for services they use. The entertainment industry as a whole is almost non-existent. Circuses and theme parks are always closed and run down, their former workers often part of the crime. In the original series, a third of the villains actually worked or had worked in the entertainment or hospitality business. In later seasons, this is completely reversed, as theme parks, science fairs, and TV studios are all thriving, so any economic depression didn't continue beyond the original series. Number 4. Tom and Jerry are probably the most well-known cartoon double act, even being parodied in The Simpsons with the ongoing Itchy and Scratchy show. Most children who watch the show see the mouse Jerry as the hero, continuously outsmarting Tom, the house cat, and occasionally his friends. It's generally an underdog story, with Jerry being much smaller than his nemesis and having to be much more resourceful to outmaneuver Tom. Looking back, many adults see themselves sympathizing more with Tom. Generally, Tom is only trying to protect his home from an intruder, who's often trying to steal food or other things belonging to Tom's owner. Tom is often punished by his owners for the mess created as he tries to catch Jerry, or by Jerry directly, while his owners remain blind to the work Tom puts in for them. Rather than simply trying to survive, Jerry goes out of his way to get Tom in trouble, either with the owners of the house or Spike the dog. But most people, especially today, overlook the most obvious thing about these two rivals: their names. Tom and Jerry first debuted in 1940, just as World War II had begun, and it was in the second episode that they were officially given their names. Looking back at the context these shows came out in, the names seem strange. Tommy was a name British soldiers had been referred by for decades at this point, and came to prominence during the First World War. At the same time, Jerry was being used to refer to German soldiers. This term originated in World War I also, before the cartoon aired, and was generally in use by 1916. It was a phrase familiar enough to have been used in British newspapers and in a poem by Rudyard Kipling. Given these names would have been known by the writers, it seems strange Jerry would outsmart Tom every episode, unless the writers aimed to imply the Germans were outwitting the British in Europe. Looking even deeper, the fact Tom is always trying to stop Jerry from sharing his home, when Jerry is just trying to survive, could imply the British were wrong to be hostile to the Germans. Even though adults may sympathize with Tom, for children, the cat is the villain of the piece. Even if Tom and Jerry wasn't intended to be pro-German propaganda, the names definitely seem strange given the cultural context when they first aired. Number 3. SpongeBob SquarePants is another series that has countless theories surrounding it, with everything from drugs to messages about nuclear testing being put forward as reasons why the characters are particularly wacky. For a show that is generally colorful and lighthearted, there are dark moments included in the show. For example, we're shown in one episode how Mrs. Puff's husband has been caught and turned into a pufferfish light. One character we haven't had an on-screen explanation for is Pearl Krabs' mother. Pearl is the whale daughter of Eugene Krabs, who is unsurprisingly a crab. Every time Pearl features in an episode, much of the audience questions just how she came about. There's a large debate over whether Pearl was actually adopted by Mr. Krabs, or if her mother really gave birth to a whale. Given the fact that Pearl only ever seems to come to her dad for money, some have suggested he isn't actually a father figure, but a sugar daddy, though the showrunners have disregarded this theory. Though the show has never addressed the issue, the official SpongeBob SquarePants trivia book explains that Pearl's mother was Mr. Krabs' ex-wife. She was a whale who left Bikini Bottom after divorcing Krabs. According to the book, Krabs is Pearl's biological father. She just takes after her mother. Some believe there's a much darker explanation for Pearl's existence, and for her mother's absence. One of the few things we know about Mr. Krabs is that he's terrified of fish hooks. This makes sense for most of the residents of Bikini Bottom, given it means almost certain death for the sea creatures. But only Mr. Krabs shows a real fear for them, suggesting he's had some experience with the hooks before. The theory, originally put forward in a gruesome comic strip, suggests Pearl's mother was killed by a large hook, or harpoon. Krabs comes across a baby whale cowering next to her dead mother and chooses to adopt her. Even with some of the darker moments in SpongeBob, this gruesome death would be much darker than anything else we've ever seen on screen, and the show writers have said they want to leave Pearl's mother a mystery. Number 2. Babar began life as a series of picture books for small children, but kept its simple style even after it transitioned to the TV screen in 1989. Including a storyline which is surprisingly dark considering the whimsy visuals. Babar is an ordinary elephant living with his family in the jungle until a hunter shoots and kills his mother. The elephants are forced off the land they call home, and Babar is split from the rest of the family. He finds himself in a human city where he's frowned upon because he doesn't fit in. He's taught how to live like a human and eventually returns to his elephant family to teach them how to live like civilized humans as well. The elephants thrive after being civilized, and Babar is crowned king. The theory suggests Babar is a thinly veiled metaphor for European colonialism. According to the theory, the elephant family represents African tribes, and the humans are the Europeans. During colonial times, it wasn't uncommon for Europeans to take African tribe leaders back to Europe and coach them in the European way of life, much like how Babar is taught to act and dress like a human. These quote-unquote civilized Africans then went back to their homeland and ruled on behalf of their European colonizers. Some have suggested Babar's transition from a wild animal into a civilized human-like elephant is supposed to represent his transition from being a carefree child into an adult, and that the links to colonialism are coincidental. But Babar's effort to civilize his elephant friends and the humans' reactions to him suggest otherwise. In the second episode of the original series, the old lady teaches Babar how to be civilized, then throws a party to show him off to the rest of the city. While this is played as allowing Babar to befriend the city people he'd earlier offended, the episode ends with the people asking Babar questions about life in the jungle, in a scene that resembles the way white people fetishized black culture. Number 1. It's well known that Disney, like many entertainment companies in the 1940s, helped produce war propaganda and cartoons to help boost morale during World War II. These included military training films, educational shorts, and military insignia, often featuring Disney's most famous characters. Of those characters, Donald Duck was singled out by the New York Times as an ambassador at large, a salesman of the American way. However, Disney animators and producers didn't necessarily agree with the war, and Disney's first war-themed short was actually written by a pacifist and highlights the differences between the glamorized life presented by the US government and the actual reality. Donald Duck starred in a 6-part series in which he was drafted into the US Army. Unlike what would be expected from propaganda pieces, the shorts didn't glamorize life at war. Donald is obviously unfit for the army and is mistreated by his sergeant, and at one point tries to commit suicide. These shorts were dispersed between many pro-war cartoons and have been a stark contrast to the regular clips that show Donald and his friends beating the Japanese and German armies. Given the relative realism writers tried to weave into these shorts, it's unsurprising some theorists believe the writers continued to use Donald Duck's character to represent unprepared men drafted to war, even after the conflict had ended. While World War II veterans were generally treated better than veterans of wars that would come later, many suffered from undiagnosed PTSD. Doctors didn't begin to understand PTSD until after the Vietnam War, and many believed World War II veterans wouldn't suffer from the disorder, as the US had won that particular war. On top of this, veterans usually suffered in silence, coming back home and adjusting relatively well to civilian life. These men had jobs and families, but still suffered from PTSD due to everything they had seen during the war. Donald Duck has many of the classic symptoms of PTSD, including flashbacks, difficulty sleeping, and sleepwalking. While Donald was always relatively known as short-tempered, especially compared to Mickey Mouse, he became a lot more unstable after his wartime experiences. One of the biggest pieces of evidence in this theory is a page allegedly from a comic printed in 1945 titled The Icebox Robber. In it, Donald is sleepwalking and eating from his icebox. He assumed his nephews were responsible. The boys try to wake their uncle up using firecrackers, which trigger a World War II flashback in which Donald believes he's being attacked by Japanese soldiers. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.